WROCC, helping you with Acorn and RISC-OS computing.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Andrew Rawnsley of R-Comp. You may also know me as Andrew Rawnsley of RISC-OS Development. I am here mostly to talk R-Comp today rather than Rod. But I will just ask, before we start on R-Comp, if anybody attended the Rod talk earlier, did anybody have any further outstanding questions that weren't answered, or anything about like pinboard or anything like that that I know more about than Richard does? No? Okay, cool. That's saves any time wasting. Right, great stuff. So, R-Comp. As always, it's been incredibly busy. We have for the show a mixture of hardware and software releases and updates. It's kind of weird doing a in-person show again. It's been, what, 2 years now since we did the last physical show for us. So it's nice to see everybody and nice to see the show has been well attended. So great stuff to everybody concerned, and thank you all for coming. I'll start with hardware, and then we'll also talk software in the second half of the talk. On the stand, I didn't bring it in because it's huge and whopping. You'll see one of our prototype TIX Duet systems, which is a multi-systems computer with both a ARM board and a Intel board, which you can run a variety of operating systems on. So the ARM board runs RISC-OS. The Intel board can run, well, Windows, Linux, fruit-flavored operating systems, you name it. And the two sides of the system work together to give you the best of both worlds. So you can see it inside a work-in-progress one. It's my own one that's been sort of stripped down for demonstration. Perhaps more tantalizingly, because the TIX Duet is a fairly high-end, expensive system, is the Forte 2 that we launched in January, February this year. I bring the little darling to do the talk on. You can see it's pretty small, but it packs an awful lot of punch into a small chassis. We brought the Forte 2 out to replace our original Forte systems because we got to a point at the end of last year where we couldn't get some of the components we needed to build the Forte original units, and we had to look elsewhere to see what we could do to replace it. This particular chassis design, it's an off-the-shelf chassis, being honest, but it ticked all the boxes we were looking for what we were doing with the Forte originally. So it has the front USB ports that we were adamant we wanted with the original Forte. It has full-size HDMIs. It has front power button. It even has many of the design cues, the way the air inlets, the curved corners, very familiar to us. What were we doing with the original Forte? But in a sturdy metal chassis, there's some heft to this. You feel like you can sort of throw it around and it's going to be absolutely fine. I'm suggesting that you do go and throw it around, but, it's reassuringly sturdy. You've got a built-in heatsink and fan. Room for a solid-state disk inside, which we tend to fit in all the machines. And we can still do our dual drive setup. But more than that is it makes a very practical RISC-OS and Linux in a single machine setup with front access to being able to switch between the two operating systems. So although you still have to run them individually, we can't yet run them separately, only one processor, even though they have multiple cores. It'd be lovely if we could dedicate 2 to Linux and 2 to RISC-OS or something like that, but it doesn't quite work like that. So you do have to sort of shut one down to access the other, but because of how the machine is designed, Forte 2 makes it a joy to run either. You can easily switch between without through a sort of physical hardware mechanism, so you know exactly what's going to happen. It's entirely predictable which operating system you're going to get. And the Linux gets full access to the USB 3 speeds of the Pi 4 in the system, so that you get super fast load times into Linux. And it shares that space with RISC-OS, so RISC-OS can share files with the Linux side. On the RISC-OS front, you're getting a world-class system with our custom software. We've added a whole new load of extra software tools for Forte 2 to control all the hardware facilities of Forte 2. And I'll introduce you to Forte tools now. Basically, Forte tools governs all of the core facilities of the Forte. You can see, well, actually, let's just look at the icon bar for a second. You can see down here we have the main Forte drive. We have the shared space, which is the space that's shared between RISC-OS and Linux, which also acts as an acceleration. So in a Forte, you have two drives. You have your main RISC-OS drive, and you also have an accelerator drive, which is also shared with Linux. The accelerator drive is basically designed to circumnavigate the key Achilles heel of a Pi, which is the storage system. Raspberry Pi Pi 4 has an amazing processor. It's probably the fastest RISC-OS processor available. It has loads of RAM. It has high-speed networking. It has great graphics. Cracking bit of kit. But its Achilles heel is its storage system. Essentially, you've got the SDIO bus and you've got USB. USB 2, USB 3, but RISC-OS doesn't do USB 3, so it's effectively USB 2 and SDIO. So you don't have the SATA or NVMe storage that you might want on a faster, or for the fastest storage system. So what we've tried to do is work around that, and we use the accelerator drive to provide the fastest read-write performance that we can with the SSD, and that has the side effect of being accessible through both operating systems. So the accelerator drive can actually boost certain things quite dramatically. For example, the Forte browser loads in I think it's about 6 seconds off the accelerator drive, but can be up to sort of 25 seconds off the normal drive. So the accelerator drive is certainly, it can give big gains. Looking at the Forte tool software, probably the least interesting is keyboard mouse, which just lets you alter the behavior. These are sort of things like you can remap keyboard facilities, change the flag keys, change the F12. If you're using a compact keyboard, you can change the behaviors of F10 and F12. You can swap mouse buttons. So if people say, oh, I'm used to using a PC, I use the right mouse button for menu. Can I have the same effect on RISC-OS? Yep, you just tick the option in Forte tools. On the display front, you can enable or disable support for 4K at 60 Hertz. Why would you want to disable it, you ask? Well, the Pi tends to run a bit hotter if you enable 4K 60. And if you're not using a 4K 60 monitor, then why are you running your processor hotter for no gain? So basically, you can tick that or untick it, depending on what you require. It has support for auto mode scaling, which is where you let the hardware of the GPU on the board handle mode changes rather than actually changing the resolution you output to the monitor. That makes it more compatible with programs that run at older resolutions, like old games or other legacy programs, full-screen programs that you might want to run. It supports a headless mode, so you don't even have to connect a monitor to it. You can just connect it to your network, and it will automatically output a 1080p desktop that you can then access with something like a VNC client or something like that on another machine to remotely control the machine. Useful if you have a range of computers. I know that Richard Orpheus, for example, runs all of his machines like that, and just sort of pulls them all into Windows on his Mac desktop, and you just tick that box and off you go. Big Mode is a carryover from the ARMbook Pinebook system. That basically makes everything more detailed at the cost of resolution. I'm not going to do it right now because we're already at a low resolution in order to accommodate the projector. It's going to make everything really, really big and barely fit on the screen, so I'm not going to do that. But if you're running on a high-resolution monitor, then it basically gives you more detail, better graphics, and bigger graphics at the expense of losing a bit of desktop real estate. So, your choice. And we've also added a large pointer mode, because when you're using a high-resolution 4K monitor, it's not always immediately obvious where the pointer is. The open firmware provides access to upgrading your operating system. Lock screen is one of our other products which is baked into the Forte Tools software, allows you to put a password on your system and block it by either at power up or after a period of inactivity. It puts up a nice picture, and just you put in a password when you're ready to unlock the system. Now the fun ones are network and power and heat. Networking on Forte 2 couldn't be simpler. You just literally plug in a network cable. I'd like to say you just connect to Wi-Fi, but that's still a few months away, I think, for RISCOS. We're working on it. So basically, you just literally plug in a cable. You don't need to reboot. You don't need to configure your networking. You can see in the corner at the moment it's saying a network cable is unplugged because I'm not plugged in, but if I was to plug one in, it would just say cable connected, and then it'll go off, pick up a network address via DHCP, configure the machine, bring up things like ShareFS and things as needed. There's an option in the middle, automatically share main drive, which, if enabled, would automatically share the main drive to other machines on your network. That's optional, so for security reasons, obviously. And then away you go. It will also auto-sync to the network time the moment it detects a network signal on the system, so that your clock is always kept up to the minute. The networking facilities also extend to VNC. During lockdown, this was super helpful because many of us have been using Zoom, and if you want to show anything relating to your RISCOS machine on a Zoom call, it's not a trivial thing. Either you have to use RPCMU, which locks you into being essentially a RISC-DC, or you have to bring over your desktop from a real RISCOS machine, which means setting up VNC. With Forte Tools, you literally just tick the box and type in a password that you want to use for security, and click Start VNC Server. So you can see the boxes down here. And then once enabled, your PC or Mac with Zoom can simply bring up your RISCOS desktop and share it on a Zoom call. So really helpful, just all automated in the software. Last but not least is the power and heat controls. You can see this Forte 2 is running at 1.8 gigahertz. The stock speed for a Raspberry Pi is 1.5. The software supports up to 2.1. So you can go up to the maximum for a Raspberry Pi. The only reason I'm not running at 2.1 is, well, sort of two reasons. Firstly, the Pi Foundation itself actually overclocks automatically in its Pi distribution, would you believe? So they use the boost mode, which is what I'm running here on this one, to get 1.8 gigahertz out of it. I figure if it's good enough for the Pi Foundation, it's good enough for me. And secondly, one is one of long-term viability, because when I sell a computer, I'm not really interested in 1 year in the future when they say, if that's the warranty period, one year. No, I'm interested in selling a computer for 5 or 10 years, because that's what I know that's what our customers expect out of a computer. People who bought ARM X6s sort of 8 years ago, they're still using the computers. They expect them to keep going. So my question is, if I want to, I quite happily ship you a machine running 2.1 gigahertz if you'd like that. But I'm just concerned a little bit, if you run a processor at its maximum overclock value from day one, what's that going to have as an effect on the processor's life over a sort of 5-10 year cycle? Could be fine, but we don't have the data points yet because the boards haven't been available for that length of time. So my preference personally is the 1.8 because, to say, it's approved by the Pi Foundation, and for RISCOS, it's super fast anyway. But if you want to adjust it, you don't void your warranty with R-Comp. If you want to try out the faster speeds, by all means, go ahead. And you can see that right now it's running at 43 degrees Celsius, 42 degrees Celsius, it's saying. This is actually without any of the fan controls. You can see the fan controls up here. I can enable them if I so desired. But I really appreciate silence. So the machine right now is running passively with no fan. just the heatsink. And a normal Raspberry Pi 4 would tend to run at about 55 to 60 degrees Celsius, in my experience. Certainly after being run for a little while, like this one, you'd be seeing temperatures of that order of magnitude. So we're running about a good 10 degrees cooler than stock, without any additional active cooling, and we're getting an extra, roughly sort of 20% performance over a base Pi, which to me, those are numbers that I like. I'm getting extra performance and I'm running 10 degrees cooler than stock, so that seems like a win to me. Forte also comes, the Forte Tools is obviously at the heart of the software, but it comes with a wide range of other applications, both free and commercial. Everything from things like Messenger Pro, Fireworks Pro, Data Power, mainstays of the R-Comp software stable. There's Impression is on there, because it's a favorite of many of us. You'll see Forte Browse, which is essentially an older version of Iris. We keep it well behind the sort of main Iris because we don't want to sort of offend anybody who's has paid money for the latest betas. But it gives people who have the Forte a way of accessing the web through their machine that is a cut above, say, NetSurf. In particular, you'll see next to it Wi-Fi setup. A number of our customers have chosen to have Wi-Fi adapters supplied with the computer. And what we found was that we needed sort of a slightly more souped-up browser to be able to configure Wi-Fi access points. So you've got Forte Browse there for that. We have a wide range of programming tools in the programming folder. In graphics, we have things like our Easy Clip included, Chartwell. All these are sort of commercial applications, plus a whole range of free applications. Also included are things like our Safe Store backup software, which makes backing up between the two drives simple and straightforward. And there's a full recovery system included. This is my own one, and I've not put the recovery system on this one, so oops. But all the customer machines have the backup solution and recovery system in place, which means that if you ever did have a drive failure or anything, you've got effectively 2 copies of the system and the recovery image of how it shipped to you on there. Updates are free of charge and can be downloaded. So, for example, we support across the Forte generations. So, the latest version of the software you're seeing here was released last week, and that's available to both original Forte users and Forte 2 users to download free of charge as part of the service. The other hardware piece of new hardware that we're introducing at the show is this little tiny beastie. It's called a Sidekick or Unibox. We couldn't quite decide on the name, so we went with both again. Essentially, it's a very, very tiny computer. Again, the idea behind it is to supplement your RISC OS machine with basically a tiny little box that can be used primarily for Uniprint, was my first thought. I read an article in Archive about the trials and tribulations with people were having with trying to keep old printers going for their RISC-OS machines, and I'm thinking to myself, well, Uniprint solves all the problems that people have with printers, and the only reason I could think of for not using Uniprint to solve the printing problems was not having suitable hardware to run Uniprint on, apart from the RISC-OS end. And I thought, well, why do people, what would stop somebody being able to use Uniprint? And I thought, well, usually it's a desire that they don't want to have an ordinary Windows computer kicking around. And the beauty of this tiny little beastie is it's completely silent, it's completely passive. You've got 4 USB 3 ports for connecting your devices. You've got Wi-Fi, you've got wired networking, twin 4K monitor connections. So it's a pretty nice bit of kit. Comes with Uniprint, and it's pre-configured for network access, so you don't need to connect a monitor, you don't need to connect a keyboard and mouse to it. It's just a tiny little box that can sit under a pile of papers. It comes with a mounting kit to the back of your monitor. You can tuck it away, hide it away. If you're using Wi-Fi, you don't even need a network connection, just a power connection and Wi-Fi is sufficient, especially if you've got a Wi-Fi printer, for example. And then Uniprint and remote operation means you can just pull it up in a window in your RISC-OS machine, or you can just hit print in your RISC-OS programs and print to it. But of course, it's a whole lot more than just printing. It can file share. You can do file launching with Uniprint, so that you can open documents that RISC-OS can't handle on it in a window on your desktop. And the beauty of this compared to, say, one of our Space Cubes or RISC Cubes is where a Space Cube and RISC Cube would set you back sort of £400 or £500, we're selling these for 250 in VAT. So essentially, it's sort of a print server box that you might pay £150, £160 for, but on steroids, you've got a complete computer for the extra payment. Essentially, it fits in your pocket. It's a form factor that I think is really quite enticing, and it unlocks a whole lot of possibilities for RISC-OS users. The price includes the Uniprint, which would normally be sort of £70, £80. So, there's a lot of value there, and in terms of being able, you can do sort of web access with it, you can access video through it, you can, let's say, open documents that RISC-OS can't handle, you print to any printer, you can use webcams with it, you can do document scanning and things like that through it. You can set it up as a mini network attached storage device, with 4 USB 3 ports, and the space, would you believe, inside it, the space for an NVMe SSD, so you can put up to 4 terabytes of high-speed NVMe M.2 storage in there, alongside the standard spec is 128 gig of storage. So there's quite a lot of scope there for expansion, despite the fact that it's so tiny. So that's the sidekick. Really, the possibilities are really whatever you can imagine for an additional tiny box that can go anywhere. Over to software. Our big new software announcement for this year, this Wakefield show, is Messenger Pro 9. The big emphasis on Messenger Pro 9 is the move to Acorn SSL module for the latest TLS and SSL support. That includes in the IMAP component, which has lagged behind for quite some time. We've now got the modern SSL support in IMAP. And indeed, that was sort of one of the compelling reasons to do the new version, was that somebody was sort of stuck that it couldn't access their IMAP server because of the older SSL that we had in the old version. And so now being able to plug it, we updated the SSL. Updated the IMAP client to use the Acorn SSL, and that's unlocked the modern security encryption on there. So big thanks to Tom Hughes, who did the programming on that. And we've also added that to the built-in POP and SMTP facilities. So again, without just a purchase of Messenger Pro 9 now gives you all the latest security stuff that previously you had to get NetFetch for. That's now built into the software, which means you can access pretty much any mail server through your RISC-OS box, either via IMAP, POP, or SMTP. The documentation has been updated to cover explaining how to use the software with Gmail and Hotmail. Gmail introduced some new security stuff this month. That's now covered in the hints and tips. So it talks you through the process to allow you to set your RISC-OS machine to cope with Gmail's latest security stuff. So that's all present and correct. And outside of the security stuff, we have done various additional bits and bobs based on some of the requests that we've had. We have better compatibility with mobile devices when sending attachments to them. Better attachment handling overall, especially for attachments with spaces in the file names. It has much better translation for spaces, both RISC-OS file names with hard spaces and incoming files with spaces in their file names. We've tidied it up, and basically it's much better. There are some performance improvements, some various zero-page little niggles sorted out. There are, forgive me, I'm trying to remember my own crib sheet from when I typed it up 2 days ago, and my mind's gone blank. I'm sorry. Suffice to say that basically I've tried to incorporate as many little improvements throughout the software as I can to make it better for everybody. It's 4 years, we believe, since Messenger Pro 8 came out at Wakefield, so we felt like it was time to do a new version, and by sort of enhancing each of the sort of sub-components in this way, we feel like Messenger Pro 9 is a nice upgrade to that piece of software. The other new release that I'll draw attention to, I think, is PyTools. I was demonstrating Forte tools with the Forte earlier in the talk, but we've also made that software, at least in part, available. Sort of 95% of it, shall we say. The other 5% is just the very hardware-specific stuff that would be a problem to find tech support on. But PyTools basically takes 95, almost probably 99% of Forte tools, and makes it available to anybody with a Raspberry Pi or Pi 400 system. That includes everything from things like monitor definition files, the big screen, multi-widescreen monitor support, the networking capabilities, all the graphic stuff. It goes beyond what I've demonstrated here, because essentially it includes all of the sort of system level components that we use on the Forte that would get installed as part of setting up a Forte, are included in PyTools. So obviously you don't get the commercial software or the sort of 2 gig or so of public domain applications, but you do get all of the sort of custom stuff that we've produced for the Forte, let's say borrowing the sort of tiny bit that wouldn't be applicable anyway, for use on any Pi. I think we go down to Pi 0 support, although I must admit I've not tried it on a Pi 0. But certainly anybody with a Pi 4 or 400 is going to get a lot of value out of out of PyTools. And so even if you're not interested in having a new machine, or you've already got a Pi 4 or Pi 400 that you bought yourself, I'd encourage you to check out PyTools. We have stuff on the stand, and you can download it on Plink Store. Like all of our stuff, you can buy it on Plink Store and download it if that's more convenient to you. On a Pi, it's probably more convenient on Plink Store simply because you don't have so much access to physical media. The download is often a more convenient way to get the software on there. Other things we've been up to, during lockdown we launched a new Fireworks Pro. I won't go through the demonstrations, but there were essentially 2 versions of Fireworks Pro that we, during the lockdown period. One added the ability to have documents that were dynamically hot linked between, you could have a spreadsheet that you put into Impression, and if you change the numbers in the spreadsheet, it changes the graph, and then the graph changes in Impression, for example. So that you don't have to sort of export a draw file that is static. You've got a dynamic chart that is data-driven because the actual spreadsheet data is embedded in the Impression or Ovation document. Also works with TechWriter, EasyWriter as well. So that was one big headline feature during lockdown, and the other big feature that we added, if I recall correctly, we improved the Excel import-export, and we also added a tool to convert Fireworks Pro spreadsheets and letters, for that matter, into HTML. This was a program that Paul Weigel originally wrote some years back, which had effectively been lost. But thanks to Andrew Conroy at Ellard, who was sort of administering the Paul software, we managed to find the program that he'd written to do this, and then I did some updates to it, as I recall. And the Fireworks programmer then sort of got interested, and he made even more suggestions based on his intimate knowledge of Fireworks' file format to say, you want to do this, you want to do that. Don't do it that way, do it this way. So we were able to sort of enhance it beyond what Paul had been able to do it, when he was alive. That's now included with Fireworks Pro in its enhanced version as a sort of little tribute to Paul, but also as a generally useful tool for getting fireworks documents into HTML format. And that also opens it up to other platforms in a way that you can work on fireworks, and then you can create documents for the web and publish the results of your spreadsheets and things as HTML. So, nice little updates there. We have new CDs for Fireworks Pro users or upgrades if you're an existing user. Come and see us on the stand. I'm sure there's lots of other things. I'm sure I'm forgetting stuff. Problem with my life at RISCOS is that there just aren't enough hours in the day between the sort of RISCOS development work so in the morning and R-Comp work in the afternoon. It's just bonkers. But if there's anything else you'd like to ask about, please feel free now to ask questions or come and chat to me on the stand. I'd love to show you any of our R-Comp products and machines and services. Oh, I know, 2 things for the future that I haven't talked about, but probably might be more exciting. On the stand, you'll see the Pinebook Pro, which is the next generation laptop for RISCOS. Main thing that's holding us back there is actually getting the stock. They've been out of production for a year because of COVID. Essentially, during lockdown, all the electronics prices went up, and they couldn't manufacture the things for the price. So basically, they put them on hiatus. According to the website, it looks like there's going to be stock in the next couple of months. So you can bet your bottom dollar that I'll be trying to get hold of some for RISCOS users. The port to for those who don't know, the Pro hardware is substantially different to the original Pinebook that we sold. It's a whole new chip called the WROCC chip, which is really quite an exciting chip. It's sort of Pi 4 level performance, but whereas what it has that's kind of exciting is that it allows for a PCI Express connection for NVMe storage. So we've still got to write that driver, admittedly, but the scope for solving the Pi storage problem in the laptop form factor by using the NVMe M.2 SSD connection, which potentially offers sort of hundreds of, or potentially full-speed NVMe drives. You talk about gigabytes per second, but I'm not sure RISCOS will be able to achieve that quite. I'm not sure the hardware can achieve that quite, to be honest with you, because of how wide the link is. But we should be looking at hundreds of megabytes a second through that link, which would be really, given what I was saying about Pi earlier, that's quite exciting for the Pinebook Pro. But you can see the current iteration of the hardware on the stand. I've got a Pinebook Pro, it's running RISCOS, so you can come and have a play. And the other project that's still waiting in the wings, being destroyed by the electronics component shortage, is the ITX motherboard for Pi Compute module. This is a custom project that we're working on that's been developed exclusively for RISCOS users. Although it will of course run Linux as well. This is basically another attempt to solve this bottleneck of storage on RISCOS to allow the Pi 4 hardware to really perform. Essentially, it's an elaborate board that basically adds native SATA controllers and M.2 support as well, PCI Express, USB 3 and so on to the Pi Compute module. Now, Pi Compute module is, for those who don't know, is essentially a Raspberry Pi without all of the usual external connections that you would have, like the HDMI ports and things like that. It's a board that is designed to plug into another board which provides all the connectivity. Now, the Pi Compute module doesn't actually expose the USB 3 because the USB 3 on a Raspberry Pi isn't built into the chip, it's a separate chip, VIA, VL. I can't remember the number, but anyway. Essentially, that sits on the PCI Express bus of Raspberry Pi 4 and hogs it, essentially. You can't have anything else on there. On the compute module, you can actually pull off the PCI Express separately because they don't have that controller on the board. So basically, the compute module only has USB 2 on the control on the compute module, and it's up to the whoever's producing the motherboard that it plugs into to choose what to do with the PCI Express, whether you want to put a USB 3 controller and have that hog the PCI Express, or whether you want to do more creative things with it. Well, our hardware designer said, well, you know, if you're making a sort of high-end design for a board, why not do everything? Because PCI Express doesn't have to be just limited to one thing. On a PC motherboard, you have multiple PCI Express slots. And there's something that, there's a chip that you can have on your board called a Pci Express Switch. It's a bit like your network switch, you know, multiple ports out. You feed one in, multiple network ports, you understand that. PCI Express Switch, much the same thing, but just running massively faster than a network switch. PCI Express, and that means you can then go to multiple devices. Now, PCI Express switches are not cheap; they're quite expensive. The more lanes more ways you switch, the more expensive it gets. But what we can do then is not just have USB 3, but we can have USB 3, we can have SATA, we can have a dedicated PCI Express slot that you can plug expansions into, and have them all switched by the PCI Express switch. Instantly, we solve the storage problem because you've now got potential, you know, as many ports as a SATA controller will offer. Well, you know, an off-the-shelf SATA controller can do 4 ports. So, hey, we've got 4 SATA ports with enough bandwidth on the PCI Express link to drive them on. But maybe we want to use an M.2 card. Fine, we can do an M.2 slot. Or do you want to have an exponent? Oh, and, rather than or, because PCI Express, the beauty of the switch is that it's not a manual switch, it's happening constantly electronically. You can have a PCI Express slot, and you can plug in, say, your Wi-Fi board, or whatever PCI Express devices you want to plug in there. Plug into the room. Instantly, you've transformed the Raspberry Pi from being a Pi 4 as it stands into effectively the heart of the modern desktop computer system. So this is an exciting project. Now, we could have cut all the corners and done a really basic job where we just take the USB 2, feed everything into USB 2, and just have like SATA connected via USB 2, and you know, everything connected via USB 2. There are existing, I saw a Kickstarter project for that, essentially everything over USB 2, even sound over USB 2. But I'm sort of sitting there thinking, well, an ordinary Raspberry Pi is everything over USB, so what's the advantage? If the whole board is running over USB 2, not even USB 3, if the whole board's running over USB 2, then you're actually worse off than a regular Raspberry Pi 4, because at least Pi 4 has 2 USB 3 ports, and you can plug your hard drives and things into that. So if we figure if we're going to do the board, then we might as well do it properly with the sort of PCI Express switching and actually unlock the performance of the thing so that you're actually genuinely getting better performance than a Raspberry Pi. Otherwise, you know, why would somebody spend, you know, a significant chunk of money on a board if all they got was the same speed as an ordinary Raspberry Pi board? It doesn't make sense.
Andrew, I think I'm going to have to stop you now. You've run over time, and CJ should be coming in a minute. Okay. So I'll cut down. Anyway, long story short, we haven't been able to buy compute modules for months, if not probably a year. So we've had to essentially put the project on hiatus because we simply can't buy some of the chips and the compute modules. If you can't buy the things, you know, the board's there, it works, the power delivery systems and things all tested and working, but without some of the rest of the chips, we've just, you know, we're at an impasse. So we're basically waiting for the component shortage to clear up. At which point, hopefully, you know, we'll revisit the project and get that out to you. But yeah, at the moment, it's just you can't buy. I mean, if you just try and go on, you know, look online, you won't find Pis or compute modules are just impossible to buy. There's the odd Pi on eBay, but compute modules, I haven't seen any anywhere for ages. Okay.